By the time I pulled up to my mother's house, the driveway was already full. I had to park 3 houses down and walk through the damp December air, juggling a tray of cranberry bars and a stack of wrapped gifts. The porch lights glowed like a stage set, and for a moment, I stood there waiting. Maybe someone would open the door. Maybe someone would see me through the frosted glass and smile. No one did. So I shifted the tray in my arms, balanced the gifts on my hip, and nudged the door open with my foot. Inside, laughter cascaded down the hallway. The sound of silverware against china echoed from the dining room. The scent of rosemary and roast filled the air, but it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. "Zinnia?" My sister's voice rang out from across the foyer. Isolde stood near the fireplace in a dress that screamed curated elegance, holding a glass of wine like it was part of her arm. "Oh, you made it." "We weren't sure you'd come this year." The words hung in the air like icicles. I gave her a tight smile and said nothing, just handed off the cranberry bars to a passing cousin and glanced around for the seating chart, which was pinned proudly to the wall next to the entrance like a wedding reception. I scanned it once, then again. My name wasn't there. "Well," Isolde said, moving beside me, "you can take the small table in the corner. We had a few extras come in last minute." The small table was set against the kitchen island, folding chairs, paper napkins, and a wobbly place setting. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My silence said it for me. I took my seat, next to a 7-year-old cousin who spilled root beer on his lap 5 minutes in. Across the room, Isolde laughed with Dad about her latest real estate acquisition, and Mom clinked glasses with their neighbor from across the cul-de-sac. And me, I poured a glass of red, held it between my hands, and let it sit untouched for the next hour. Later, I heard Mom introducing me to someone I hadn't seen in years, some second cousin from Texas, probably. "This is Zinnia," she said. "She's visiting for the holidays." Visiting, not my daughter, not my youngest, just a woman passing through. I stared at the Christmas tree, blinking against the blur of lights, and thought about the previous year. There had been a card on my chair that said, "Welcome home." My niece Leora had run into my arms, her curls bouncing, asking if we could bake cookies like always. This year, she hadn't even looked me in the eye. When I finally caught her in the hallway near the bathroom, she hesitated. "Mom said you don't live here anymore," she said softly. "So I thought you weren't family." I crouched to her level. "I'll always be your family," I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was still true. The night dragged on. Isolde gave a toast about the strength of family. My consulting work didn't come up. The only question I got was whether I had driven or flown in, not where I'd been, not how I was. It was like I'd died and no one had sent flowers. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet. I sat in my car with the engine off, scrolling through the draft I'd written the week before. "I won't be coming next year, and you'll understand why." I hovered over the send button, then I deleted it. Not because I was staying silent, but because I'd already said everything I needed to. My actions would speak next, and they'd be louder than anyone's toast. I pressed the key fob, popped the trunk, and smiled. They didn't know I had already packed. I didn't go back inside right away. After checking that my trunk was still securely packed, I lingered near the porch. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of salt and cinnamon, familiar in a way that made everything sting sharper. I eventually walked in through the kitchen, blending into the flow of movement like a hired caterer. The party had shifted into its more formal rhythm. Everyone was at the dining table by the time I re-entered, except for me. Again, I eased back into the corner seat Isolde had assigned me, the one that faced the wall and half-blocked the view of the fireplace. I noticed she'd taken the spot I used to have, next to Dad. I didn't expect it to hurt, but it did. Mother stood, tapping her wine glass with a salad fork. "Before dessert, I'd like to raise a toast to our star," she said. "Isolde, for her brilliant acquisition in Battery Park. Your father and I are so proud." Polite applause fluttered through the room. My own hands stayed still. I watched as she beamed and took the moment like a well-wrapped gift. Then, the lights dimmed slightly and a projector flickered on. A slideshow began, set to some overused instrumental version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." Photos rolled across the screen, birthdays, vacations, family events. I braced myself. That's when it happened. Thanksgiving last year. A group photo. I remembered exactly where I'd been standing, beside Dad, one arm draped around Lyora, laughing. In the photo, I wasn't there. My cousin Theo leaned in and whispered with a smirk, "Weird how you never show up in pictures." I said nothing, but inside something cracked. I didn't disappear. I was erased, clipped out like a blemish on a perfect record. Not absent, excluded. Moments later, as if the universe wanted to double down, I remembered I had been asked weeks ago to give a short toast before dessert. It wasn't much, just something light, a reflection, maybe to balance out Isolde's corporate highlight reel. I found the event coordinator, a college student with glitter eyeliner and a clipboard. "Hi," I said gently. "I think I'm on the program for a short toast before dessert." She glanced down the clipboard and shrugged. "We're a little behind. Mrs. Sinclair said we'd move on to Isolde's closing remarks." Right, of course. We wouldn't want to delay Isolde. I went back to my seat and watched as my sister stepped up with poise and prepared remarks, quoting business authors and thanking everyone for believing in legacy. My hands curled into fists beneath the tablecloth. I wasn't angry they forgot me. I was angry they remembered and chose to pretend I didn't matter. Across the table, Dad sat blank-faced, stirring his coffee. He didn't once meet my eyes. Mom caught my glance from across the room and offered me a smile so brittle it could shatter. I smiled back. The kind of smile you wear when someone's watching, the kind that hides every unsaid thing under your tongue. This wasn't carelessness, I thought. It was design, calculated omission. A family friend, Mrs. Hanley, the one who always wore perfume so strong you could smell it in the driveway, leaned toward me and whispered, "You okay, hun?" I looked her in the eyes, gave a small nod. "I'm just starting to hear the silence," I said. She blinked like she didn't quite understand. But I did, because the most deafening moment wasn't being cropped from the slideshow or bumped from the program. It was looking around the room and realizing that no one, not one person, noticed I had been left out. That kind of silence, it doesn't echo, it replaces you. And if no one noticed I was missing, maybe I could disappear completely. After the last car pulled away and the string lights were dimmed, I found myself alone on the porch again. The same porch where I once carved pumpkins as a child, where we lit sparklers every 4th of July, now just a slab of wood that didn't remember me. The Charleston air had cooled since earlier in the evening. I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders and sank into the wicker chair near the edge. My feet tapped against the porch rail, an old habit from when I was too nervous to speak at the adult table. Tonight should have felt like déjà vu. But it didn't. Tonight had a different kind of silence. Not the quiet that comes when everyone's had too much pie. This one had teeth. It chewed at the parts of me I hadn't armored well enough. A photo from earlier drifted into my thoughts, Isolde laughing with the cousins. I had walked past them just in time to hear her say, "You know, Zinnia's big startup moment? Total flop." She spent all that time and money just to land right back where she started. Laughter, polite, performative. I didn't stop walking, didn't say anything, just filed it away. The same way I had filed away the student loan check I'd written in 2016, the one that covered the remainder of Isolde's graduate school tuition. The startup she ridiculed? That exit paid for her law degree. They didn't know that. Because I never told them. Because I thought it would be enough to just help. I didn't want applause. I just didn't want to be erased. In my mind, I replayed the moment I signed that wire transfer. I'd just landed my first major investment partner, and the celebration dinner had been Thai takeout and a bottle of $12 wine. It hadn't mattered. I was building something, my life, my name, my worth. But tonight, my name had been reduced to a footnote in my own family. When I tried to bring it up, what I did for her, once, years ago, Mom brushed it off. "That's what sisters do, sweetheart. Help each other. You're being petty. Petty." And tonight, when she introduced me to one of the guests, I heard it again. "This is Zinnia. She's still finding her path." Still, I was 34, managing over $4 million in assets, consulted for 3 investment firms across the Southeast. But to my mother, I was still wandering, because I hadn't taken the path she recognized. What hurt wasn't the words. It was the knowing she believed them. My business cards were still tucked in my clutch. The ones I had custom printed with embossed lettering and my new branding, Zinnia Hawthorne, CF Peer. I didn't hand out a single one. They wouldn't have kept them. I pulled the card out and ran my finger along the raised letters. They felt heavier than paper, like all the years I spent trying to carve out something of my own were sitting there in 16 PT font and a logo no one in that house had asked about. You can tell a lot about how a family sees you by what they leave out when you're not around. I'd read that once in a therapist's waiting room. The quote had seemed poetic then. Now it felt like prophecy. It wasn't just the party. It was every year I let them pretend I was the flaky one, the emotional one, the one who was a bit too intense. And the truth? I helped fund 2 down payments in that family. Covered summer camp for my niece. Bailed out Uncle Russell when he forgot to pay taxes. But my name was never in the toast. My name didn't live in the stories they told. Because my role was useful, but never celebrated. I opened my phone and stared at the screen. I knew I wouldn't post anything, not tonight, but I drafted a message anyway. Here's to the ones they crop out, and the ones who don't need to be in the photo to know they built it. I saved it in drafts. Not yet, but soon. The next morning, I poured my coffee into a travel mug. The trunk was still packed. It was close to 1:15 in the morning when I finally collapsed into the guest bed. I hadn't changed out of my dress. The sequins scratched against my skin as I lay there in the dark, phone in hand, thumbs scrolling out of reflex more than interest. Isolda's Instagram post sat at the top of my feed, time-stamped just before midnight. Her caption read, "Family means everything," with a sparkling emoji and a red heart. I clicked on the photo, knowing better, but doing it anyway. It was the usual. Mom and Dad flanking her in front of the Christmas tree. Champagne glasses raised. Leora crouched in front, smiling wide. The fireplace was lit. The ornaments glowed. I had been standing right next to Leora when that photo was taken. But I wasn't in it. The crop was precise. Not accidental. And that was when it hit me. It wasn't that I was excluded from one dinner, or one slideshow, or one speech. It was a pattern. An aesthetic. I stared at that picture for longer than I want to admit. Then came the message. "Did you not make it to Christmas this year?" It was from Gina, a cousin on Dad's side I hadn't seen in 3 years. "I was there," I typed back. Then deleted it. Rewrote. "I made it. Just not into the frame." No response. A memory flashed. Me, 10 years old, clutching a gift I saved up for with allowance money. A poetry book I found in a used bookstore downtown. I had overheard Mom telling a friend she missed her college days and loved Auden. I'd wrapped it myself. She opened it, smiled, said, "Oh, this is nice," and then placed it on a side table. I remember thinking, next year, I'll do better. Tonight, I brought her a signed first edition of that same book. I spent weeks finding it. When she opened the wrapping, she lit up. "Oh, Isolda," she said, reading the tag aloud. "You always remember the little things." My heart didn't drop. It sunk, like a stone in wet sand. I stared at the tag. I knew that wasn't my handwriting. The "From is sold" had been taped over mine. Later, I found my original label in the trash. I didn't say anything during dinner, but as I washed dishes, because no one else did, I turned to Isolda in the kitchen. "Why'd you switch the gift tag?" She didn't even look up from her phone. "It looked better that way." I blinked. "You mean it looked better with your name on it?" "Zinnia, you're always too sentimental about things. It's just a book." "No," I said slowly. It wasn't just a book. It was a memory. One I wanted to share with her. She gave a small laugh, like I was being dramatic. "Well, then next time, write your name in Sharpie." And that was it. No apology, no recognition. She didn't just take credit, she robbed intention. She made my kindness feel naive, like a performance that hadn't landed with the audience. Back in the guest room, I flipped through more photos. In one, I saw the top of my head, barely visible behind the tree. In another, my arm was cut off mid-wave. A shadow, a blur, never central, always on the edge. I closed the app, dropped the phone beside me, and stared at the ceiling. That's when I got up, quiet as breath, and began packing the rest of my things. The clothes I had left hanging in the closet, the shoes tucked under the bed, the second charger I'd kept here out of habit, the bottle of my favorite body lotion I left in the guest bathroom 2 years ago and no one had thrown away. Just moved to a drawer. Every item, every piece of me that lingered, I collected. Gently. Without noise. When I closed the trunk, I looked back at the house. The glow from the tree seeped through the windows like nothing had changed. But everything had. Next year, I won't be cropped. I'll be gone. By sunrise, all that was left of me in that house were the shadows they didn't bother to erase. The morning after Christmas crept in under a gray sky, heavy and slow. The fire in the living room had burned low, but the air still smelled faintly of pine and leftover wine. Breakfast was late. Elowen's signal that she'd slept in, but truthfully just didn't want to sit at the table with too many people who might require effort. I came down after everyone else. My place at the kitchen island was still the same. Isolde's laugh was the first sound I heard. She was recounting something from the night before, a self-deprecating tale that still managed to highlight her business acumen and social relevance. My father chuckled, tapping the rim of his mug. Elowen nodded like it was her job to agree with whatever made the room feel whole. I poured coffee in silence. "You know, I was thinking," I said after a few minutes, my voice cutting into the soft buzz. "It was odd. The gift I brought for Mom, the Auden book, had my handwriting replaced. And the photos, I seemed to be missing from most of them. On purpose." The clinking of forks paused, like the breath before a storm. Elowen didn't look up. Isolde, however, was ready. "Oh God, Zinnia, not this again." She let out a laugh, light and sharp. "Can we not do the victim thing every year? It's exhausting." "I'm not being a victim," I said evenly. "I'm just asking if anyone else noticed it." Before anyone else could answer, Dad stepped in, voice thick with authority that had gone unused for years. "Let's not ruin Christmas, all right? You always do this." And those 4 words, were what splintered whatever resolve I had left. I always do this. He didn't ask for clarification, didn't consider my perspective, just assumed, as always, that I was the problem. I placed my mug down carefully. My hands were steady, but my chest buzzed. Not with rage, but clarity. Later, in the living room, the family golden retriever barked as the wrapping paper flew. Leora giggled. Elowen bent down, scratching behind his ears. "At least you never disappoint me, huh, darling?" she said with a soft chuckle. The entire room joined her in the laugh like it was the warmest moment of the day. And I just stood there. Not seen, not heard, not needed, not even more important than the damn dog. That afternoon, after helping fold linen napkins and stacking plates I never used, I pushed my chair back from the dining table slowly. The sound of the legs dragging against the hardwood drew more attention than anything I'd said all morning. I looked directly at Elowen first. "I won't spend another year in this house disappearing quietly. I won't keep being your emotional landfill so you can all feel clean." Her mouth parted. No words came out. Then I turned to Isolde. "You can keep pretending you're the only daughter who matters. It's a performance you've rehearsed your whole life." And finally, to my father. "You could have spoken up, but you never did." Not when it counted. He raised his hand, ready to say something, but I cut him off. "No, this time, you listen." Isolde scoffed. "What is this? Are you threatening to leave or something?" "No," I said. "I'm promising it." And then I left. No yelling. No door slamming. Just the quiet click of a woman who'd finally decided she didn't need to be tolerated anymore. They thought I was bluffing. I didn't say another word. I just opened the garage and started the car. The house was still asleep when I woke, though I couldn't say whether it was from habit or dread. I stared at the ceiling for a while, the ceiling fan humming just loud enough to keep my thoughts from settling. I sat up, feet touching the cold floorboards, and glanced over at the small suitcase near the closet, already half-packed the night before. A form of insurance. I hadn't known how necessary it would feel until now. My phone was silent. No texts. No missed calls. Not a single blinking notification to suggest someone had noticed what happened at the table the night before. I took my time brushing my hair, dressing, folding the throw blanket at the foot of the bed. If I moved slowly enough, maybe I wouldn't feel the sting when I faced them again. The kitchen smelled like reheated biscuits. Elowen was at the stove, stirring something that didn't need to be stirred. She looked up at me, neutral-faced, as if yesterday hadn't happened. "Morning," she said, barely lifting her chin. "Do you mind helping with cleanup? Isolde's still sleeping. You're always so good at these things." No question mark. No room for no. I nodded out of habit and turned to the sink. Plates from the night before had been left soaking in lukewarm, greasy water. I rolled up my sleeves and started scrubbing. There was a rhythm to it that calmed me, until I caught my own reflection in the faucet. And for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman in the distorted steel curve. She looked tired, not from work or age, but from years of standing in places where she was invisible. Even now, I thought, I'm the cleanup girl in my own mother's house. I dropped the sponge into the sink, water splashing onto my shirt. I dried my hands, turned, and walked to the dining room where Elowen had set the table for breakfast. My father was there, reading the paper as if nothing in the world had ever cracked, and Isolde sat smugly across from him, scrolling through her phone with her coffee untouched. "I'm not staying for lunch," I said, my voice steady. Elowen didn't look up. "Maybe you shouldn't have come at all." The sentence landed like a slap with gloves on. Leora glanced at me, fork paused mid-air. My father didn't speak. Isolde smiled into her mug. I turned to my mother. Noted. I walked back to the guest room and zipped my suitcase shut. There was no dramatic farewell, no final scream or slammed door. Just the quiet act of reclaiming space, the kind that had been taken from me in small ways for years. Outside, the sky was overcast, the driveway damp with dew. I stood beside my car for a moment, the key fob cool in my hand. My breath curled in the air, soft and clear. I looked back at the house one last time. I remembered being 12, crying in the hallway after sticking up for a friend who was bullied at school. Elowen told me I was too emotional and that girls like you don't get very far when they make people uncomfortable. It had taken me years to unlearn the idea that being uncomfortable meant I was wrong. Now I understood. My family didn't protect the ones who stood up. They kept the ones they could manage. Some families keep the ones they can control, not the ones they should keep. I got into the car. The trunk had already been packed. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. As I pulled out of the driveway, I whispered to no one, "You won't even notice I'm gone. That's how I know I should go." 12 minutes later, I passed the city limits sign and didn't look back. The road out of Charleston stretched before me in a quiet ribbon, the horizon dim with early light. No music played. I'd turned the radio off after the first 30 miles. Even the soft hum of the tires on the highway couldn't drown out the silence inside me. Silence that had settled deep in my bones, far louder than anything words could have offered. I stopped at a roadside diner just past Monk's Corner, the kind with yellowed menus, a jukebox in the corner, and a waitress named Dot who called everyone Sugar. I ordered black coffee and eggs I barely touched. Mostly I just needed Wi-Fi and a moment to breathe without pretending to be grateful. When I opened my phone, I saw the preview of a message. New event added, core family only, Jan dinner. My heart didn't sink. It clenched. I tapped through and found myself removed from the Sinclair family group chat. No alert, no goodbye, just gone. My photo icon no longer visible. The shared calendar still synced from years ago showed event after event. My name nowhere. It wasn't a glitch. It was a decision. I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered. Part of me wanted to type something petty, screen capture it, send it to one of the distant cousins who still talked to me in secret, but I didn't. Instead, I closed the app and opened the cloud folder my father had shared years ago for family schedules. One document caught my eye. Guest list. Family Foundation Winter Dinner. At the top, core family only, no Zinnia. The message was loud without being written in caps. I sipped the cold coffee and scrolled to a voicemail I'd missed the night before. Leora. Hi, Aunt Z. Mom said you're not really part of things anymore. But I miss you. I saved the shells we found last summer. I hope you're okay. Her voice cracked a little, like she knew she wasn't supposed to be calling. I played it twice. Then a third time. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had finally learned the difference between grief and clarity. They didn't just write me out, they rewrote the script and handed it to a child. I opened a new note on my phone. Typed, "They removed me from their version of the family. That doesn't make their version true." Then I deleted the group thread entirely. Not in anger, not in pain, in certainty. After paying the check, I stepped back into the cold. The Atlantic wasn't far now. I'd booked a small room off Sullivan's Island with a view of the water and a porch wide enough for one chair and a glass of wine. That night, I stood barefoot outside, the sea air salty and honest. No noise, no pretending. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't ignore it. It was from my lawyer. "I have the documents ready, just say when." I stared at the message and responded, "Let's meet Monday." That was the last morning I ever cried for them. The next time I saw my name, it was on a deed. The hotel room was small but clean. Neutral beige walls, a modest view of the bay, a bed that creaked but held me like it knew I hadn't rested in weeks. I sat at the edge, laptop open, fingers moving across the keys in a rhythm I'd memorized long before anyone at that house remembered what I did for a living. Client reports, portfolio updates, approval for a new investment package, all business, all mine. Quiet proof that I wasn't who they thought or pretended I was. I was not failing. I was flourishing. And yet, the same image played in the back of my mind on loop. The one from the night I left. Isolde's voice. The way she projected just loud enough for the table to hear. Her eyes locked on mine. So what is it now? Financial coaching for Instagram moms? A few people chuckled, including my father. My mother sipped her wine without flinching. She knew better, but she let it land. And I didn't flinch either. I didn't fight. I just swallowed the heat that rose in my chest and let it sink until I could carry it out in silence, but it stayed with me. You don't burn bridges when you were never invited to cross them. I read that in a business blog once, intended for tech founders, but somehow perfectly fitting for black sheep daughters too. I closed the laptop, stood and walked to the window. The ocean was still there, lapping at the edge of the island like it had nothing better to do. I stood for a long time, hands in the pockets of a cardigan I hadn't worn since Denver, and I remembered. It happened during dessert. Isolde's words, the way they stung more for their familiarity than their sting. The final blow came minutes later. I'd tried to change the subject, redirect the tension, shift focus back to the holiday, but she wasn't done. She stood, glass raised, and said to the room, "Honestly, if someone's going to ruin every gathering, maybe don't come at all." No one objected, not even Elowen. And Dad pretended to read the back of the wine bottle. Leora looked down at her plate, so I stood up, took my coat, and left mid-toast. Nobody followed, nobody called. I didn't leave the party, I whispered to myself that night. I was removed like an item on the wrong guest list. Back at the hotel, I opened my email and typed a single line to my assistant. Block all personal numbers, no responses unless client confirmed. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to family, and deleted the entire group thread. One swipe, one confirmation, gone. They won't hear from me because they never truly listened anyway. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not peace, not closure, just stillness, like I had finally stepped outside of the frame and realized I could breathe better without the weight of pretending. I moved to the desk and pulled out the fireproof folder I'd carried with me since summer, labeled in black ink, Trust, S.H. Inside was everything they didn't know. A deed to a beachfront property, an investment account worth more than anything Isolde had touched. A power of attorney signed by my grandfather before his stroke. All of it. In my name. Left to me. Not because I asked, but because someone in this family once saw who I really was. I had never told them about it, never bragged, never wielded it like a weapon. But now, I opened the documents, spread them across the desk, and whispered, "Let's begin." The next time they'd see my name, it wouldn't be in a family chat, it would be on a letterhead. I arrived at the beach house just as the sun started its slow drop into the Atlantic, bathing the pale stucco walls in gold. It had been quiet the entire drive, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional gust of sea wind that slipped through the cracked windows. The keys felt unfamiliar in my hand, though I'd held them for over a year. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, letting the soft roar of the ocean wash over me like a baptism. The front door opened easily. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Clean, minimal, calm. The opposite of everything I'd just left behind. There was no gallery of family photos on the walls, no framed certificates from school fundraisers or sports trophies gathering dust, just space, space I owned, space I had chosen. Sometimes you have to build the life they said you didn't deserve just to prove you never needed their permission. I'd underlined that sentence in a book years ago. Now it lived in my bones. I dropped my duffel on the couch, walked out to the back deck, and stood facing the ocean. The tide was low. The waves lapped gently, rhythmic like breath. I let out one of my own. I opened the trunk of my car before I unpacked anything else. Every bag was arranged in perfect order, outfits rolled neatly, paperwork sealed in a fireproof pouch, chargers labeled, toiletries bag zipped tight. 3 days before the party, I'd packed it all. Every sock, every scarf. I'd packed while they were still pretending I'd be part of things. They thought they were pushing me away in real time, but I'd already left. I slid the folder marked Estate Transition from the side pocket of my briefcase. Inside, I found the notarized documents I'd reviewed with my grandfather's attorney months before his death. It had taken nearly a year to transfer everything, to process the account movements, to set up the tax structures. The house was mine. The investment account, quietly fed for years by a trust no one else knew about, was also mine. I'd inherited more than square footage. I'd inherited freedom. I texted Elowen, out of reflex more than hope. Made it safe. The message failed to deliver. I double-checked, blocked. My chest tightened, but it didn't break. I wasn't shocked. I was free. She'd made her decision. Long before this, I was just finally willing to believe her. I walked into the office, small, tucked in the back corner of the house, with a walnut desk and a lamp I'd bought from an estate sale 2 towns over. The smell of paper and salt met me like an old friend. I laid the deed flat on the surface and stared at it. Zinnia Sinclair Hawthorne. No footnotes. No co-signers. Just me. No one had to believe I deserved it. It was already mine. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, notifications lighting up one after another. Client messages, updates from my firm, a request for a speaking engagement I'd nearly forgotten I accepted. I opened a blank document. The title came first. What you lose when you leave the table, and what you gain when you build your own. I wrote without hesitation. No editing. No self-censoring, just truth. By the time the sky had turned dark and the waves became black glass, I hit save, and I smiled. 2 days later, the editor called. The title made them pause, but the story? They said it might change lives. I sat at my favorite cafe near the water, a quiet corner table with a clear view of the ocean. The air carried a damp saltiness that clung to my coat. My latte steamed gently in the late morning chill. I had been here often during transition periods, after client calls, between flights, after the first time my father forgot my birthday. The email came in at exactly 11:59 a.m. Subject, your piece is now live. I clicked the link with calm fingers, already knowing what it said. I'd edited it 13 times, proofread it in a dozen locations. But this moment felt different, permanent. Like I had carved something into stone. There it was, centered on the magazine's homepage. Coastal Investment Advocate shares story of family erasure and financial redemption. Underneath, my name, my credentials. A photo of me, not smiling, just standing in front of the beach house, my beach house. Reputation is rented. Character is owned. That line had made the editor hesitate. But it stayed. Comments started within minutes. Powerful. I had no idea you went through this. I've been cropped out too. Some came from past clients, others from strangers who saw themselves in my sentences. I read each one slowly, not to feel validated, but to witness, in real time, that my story had landed where it needed to. Outside the walls that once tried to contain me. Somewhere between reply number 22 and 33, I got a ping on my personal Instagram, a post from Isolde. She was posing in front of a white house on the coast, my house. The caption read, "Grateful for the growth, the journey, the generational blessings. Hashtag boss women had legacy built." I didn't feel angry, just tired. I didn't even have to reply. Within an hour, the comments flooded in under hers. "Wait, isn't that your sister's house? I just read her article. You should really tag her. I thought this was Zinnia's property." The tide had turned. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain. She edited the caption twice, deleted it after 4 hours. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't need to. That same afternoon, I received a direct message from a woman named Karen Mitchell. She'd been one of Elowen's best friends for 20 years. We hadn't spoken in a decade. I had no idea. "We only ever heard one side," she wrote. I replied, "That's usually the side doing the talking. No vengeance, just truth." More messages followed, from neighbors, from former teachers, from people who once tilted their heads when they spoke to me like I was some lost cause with a resume. I replied to each one graciously. Not because I owed them kindness, but because I'd already moved on. I closed my laptop around 6 p.m., ready to unplug, when a Slack notification popped up from my assistant. "A Seraphine Sinclair Sr. just left a voicemail, wants to schedule a call." I didn't click the audio file, just skimmed the transcript. I read the article. "I think I owe you more than a call." I leaned back in my chair, the noise of the cafe fading beneath the sound of waves outside. And just like that, the silence finally broke, but not in the way I thought it would. The morning fog clung to the windows like it had something to prove. I stood out on the deck with a mug of coffee, barefoot, sweater sleeves tugged over my hands. The beach was still. I could hear the slow push of the tide, and in my palm, I reread the transcript. I read the article. "I think I owe you more than a call." It came from Seraphine Sinclair Sr., my father. After all this time, the man who never looked up when I left the table, who only ever raised his voice to quiet mine, now decided it was time to reach out. And yet, not to say sorry, but to say something that sounded like a favor to himself. I took a deep breath and dialed. He answered after the second ring. "Zinnia." His voice had that same familiar timbre, just enough gravel to sound authoritative, just enough restraint to sound unbothered. "Dad," I said flatly. "No warm-up, no playing nice." "I just wanted to say," he began. "I read the article. It caught me off guard, but it was well written." "You've always had a way with words." "That's not what this is about," I said. A pause, then a shift in tone. "I should have done more. I wasn't always present. I get that now." "But you were present," I replied. "You were in the room when she changed the tag, when Isolde mocked my work, when she told me not to come back. You just didn't speak." Another pause. Longer. "We all make mistakes. Sometimes we act out of habit, out of pressure. Did you know Mom sold the bracelet?" The line went completely silent. "You mean the one Grandma left for you?" "Yes, the one you said was mine. I saw it on Meredith King's wrist at the Coastal Health Gala." He exhaled, not shocked, just caught. "It was complicated," he muttered. "It always is. For people who never have to hold the consequences," I said. "You let her rewrite everything. You let her decide what I was worth, and you stood there with your hands in your pockets." "I didn't know she gave it away," he said, voice low. She didn't, I corrected. She sold it. That shut him up. I turned and walked inside the house, pacing slowly past the windows as the sun finally pushed through the fog. You want to know the truth? I asked him. This isn't about a bracelet. It's about legacy. You stood by while mine got redistributed like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. He cleared his throat. Look, I'm not trying to argue with you. I just thought maybe we could move forward. You moved forward without me years ago, I said. I'm just catching up. The silence on the other end wasn't guilty. It was exhausted. Because for people like him, being held accountable felt like punishment. Well, he said, you know where we are if you ever want to talk again. I know, I said, and hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph either. I just felt intact. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, no name, just a single photo attached. It was Leora. In the picture, she held a white envelope against her chest. In faded cursive, my name was scrawled across the front. Underneath, the message read, "She wanted me to have this." I stared at the handwriting. It was my mother's. I hadn't seen it since I was 19. I opened it slowly, unsure if I'd find closure or another cut. A week had passed since the call that didn't mend anything. I hadn't spoken to anyone else in the family since. There was nothing left to say, but something had arrived that did speak, louder than any apology ever could. The envelope sat open on my desk, beside a cold cup of coffee and a view that hadn't lost its luster. The handwriting was undeniably Elowen's, elegant, sharp, and deliberate. Inside wasn't a note or an apology or even a goodbye. It was a notarized document, an addendum to her trust. Dated 9 months ago. I was named sole beneficiary, real estate, remaining investments, the family foundation oversight. Everything she hadn't given me in life, she had handed to me in ink. There was no explanation. Just her signature at the bottom. Sometimes justice isn't loud, it's notarized. I sat with that truth for hours. I read it, reread it, not because I doubted it was real, but because for once, something had gone unchallenged. The next morning, I walked into a boardroom that used to carry my last name like it was a burden. The Sinclair Family Foundation's quarterly meeting was held in the Charleston downtown branch of our father's law firm. Oak panels, a brass plaque with our family crest, chairs that creaked under the weight of outdated tradition. Isolde was already seated. So was Seraphine Sr. They looked up when I walked in, wearing the navy blazer that Grandpa had once called presidential. I placed a leather folder on the table, slid it toward the secretary, and sat down at the head of the table. This meeting, I said calmly, will proceed under the new authority established by Trust Revision, dated March 3rd. I am now the legal chair of this board. Isolde blinked. Dad leaned forward, already ready to argue. You can't... I slid a second folder across the table. Signatures, bank transitions, bylaws. His mouth stayed open, no words forming. You don't get to erase me, I continued. Not anymore, not legally, not financially, not emotionally. The room fell quiet. At the end of the meeting, as I packed my notes, the door opened. Leora stepped in. She was holding a small box. I found this in Mom's closet, she said quietly. She kept everything, every letter you ever sent. Inside were folded notes, printed emails, handwritten cards, even the crumpled holiday letter I'd written when I was 10. I didn't cry. I just closed the lid and said, "You're the only one who didn't lie about remembering me." She nodded and gave me a real hug. No cameras, no audience. That night, I returned to the beach house and burned the last photo album I'd kept in a box under the bed. Not out of hatred, but closure. I watched the flames eat the faces I no longer recognized, and I didn't feel empty. I felt finished. I sent a single email to the Sinclair family account. We're no longer related. We're just people with overlapping paperwork, and that's about to end. Then I finalized the dissolution of every joint asset. Closed accounts, canceled access, reclaimed my name. A month later, I sat in a podcast studio overlooking the harbor. The host asked, "What's the hardest part about walking away from the people who raised you?" I smiled. "You don't have to be welcomed back to prove you belonged," I said. "Sometimes your greatest power is walking out and owning what they assumed you'd never claim." We wrapped the episode. As I signed the final release document, the host leaned over and whispered, "That was incredible." I nodded, tapped the pen against the table once, and said quietly, "My mother's last gift wasn't property, it was power, and this signature, my signature, sealed what they never saw coming."